Hey, and welcome back to part 2 of our Mario Shuffle game tutorial. We're building a fun 2-player board game in Scratch where you'll be playing characters from the Mario universe, moving them around a randomly generated game board, trying to get to the end before your opponents, who are also Mario characters, land on you and send you back to the beginning. So last week we created our randomly generating game board, which has positive and negative squares that you can land on that will move you forward or backward on the screen. This week we're going to place our first couple of characters on the board, and we're going to set up a really fun dice rolling mechanic that has some animated dice rolling and moving across the screen and then landing and turning into a variable on our screen. So let's get right to the coding then. Okay, now that our playing board is set up, let's turn our attention to player 1. Now, player 1's going to have 3 game pieces to move across the board: Mario, Luigi, and Wario. So we're going to do a bit of initialization first to make sure that everything's set up properly, and then we can start to code it. So under the green flag here, we're going to go to our sound commands and grab a set volume to 100%. We're going to be playing with volume later, and we just want to make sure that everything's initialized properly. We want our main Mario sprite to be hidden. It's his clone, so we're actually going to be running around on the board, so we just want him out of the way. We're going to set the size to 100% just to initialize everything properly. Now we've got some local variables we need to initialize here. First of all, there's one called player number here. Again, so each of your playing pieces is going to be stamped with its own unique number. So Mario is going to be number 1, Luigi is going to be number 2, and Wario is going to be number 3. So we're going to want to stamp that number onto each of our clones. Each of our clones is going to have a current space variable, which is just going to say which of these squares you're on. So everyone's starting on square 1, space 1. So we're going to set that variable to 1 for the first guy. We're going to set have I moved to 0 here. So have I moved is a local variable that just determines if our player has moved in this particular turn, because the player is not going to be able to move twice in one move. You have to distribute your dice rolls between different players. All right, we've also got some global variables that we're initializing here. So these ones have all been local. The global variables are character is moving, and that's set to 0. So if there's a character anywhere in motion on the board, that's going to be set to 1, and that'll stop the game from progressing until that player is finished moving, basically. We're also going to set a variable called red team points to 0, and that's basically whether the red team has successfully sent anyone home or not to the end of the board. So once you get up to 3, that means you'll have won the game. All right, under our motion menu, we're going to set rotation style to left, right, and point in the direction right. And that is going to just get everyone set up so that we can start placing them on the board. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our clones now. We want 3 of these clones, so we'll just do a repeat 3 times here. We're going to use this variable, this player number or player ID number here. We're going to change it by 1 each time we come around this loop. So it starts off at 0, and the first time around this loop, it'll be 1. And that will be stamped onto this character. When we create a clone, that will make his ID number 1, and it'll stay that way for that character. And when we come around that loop again, that's going to change by 1, and it'll become 2, and our second character will have the ID number 2 put on him when he's created, etc., until we're done here. At the very end, once we come out of this loop, our main character is going to have the ID number 3, which we don't want. So we're just going to set that player ID number to 4 so that we can tell our main sprite apart from the clones. The main sprite's not going to be doing anything through the rest of the game, so we will just want to make sure that we can differentiate him from the clones. So we're going to be moving around the screen. So we'll give him an ID number of 4. Okay, we're going to go down below and do a when I start the clone here. We're going to make sure that our character's at the front. All our playing pieces are in front of the playing board. So we'll move them to the front, and we'll have them visible by showing. One last little thing that we can do here, just to confirm that our guys have been stamped with individual ID numbers. This is a fun little trick here. We're just going to go grab a say hello. And inside there, we're going to put that variable, the ID number, player number. And so now when our players are created, our clones, you'll see that they'll each be stamped with an ID number. Let's pick them up and move them on the screen here. And you can see that there are 3 characters, each of whom has his own little ID number. We can confirm what they are by having them say that. Okay, we don't want that in our final game, so I'm going to grab that save block and trash it. I just wanted to show you guys how we can confirm what everybody's ID number is. Okay, from there, now we're just going to run a little if statement so that we can stamp each of these guys with some additional variables. So we're going to take the first guy. If player number is equal to 1, so our first character, Mario, we're going to want him to wear a Mario costume, Mario Idol. We're going to set him to a start position. So I've figured out that the best spot on the screen is going to be an X of minus 210 and a Y of 80. Which will put them right around here on the left side of the screen. We also have a variable here called starting costume. Now we want each of these guys to wear a different costume. So Mario is going to be wearing the Mario Idol costume. Then he's going to move into some moving costumes when he runs on the screen. But we want him to know which initial costume to go back to once he's done running. So we're going to set this starting costume variable to 1 because the Mario Idol costume is costume number 1 on our list. Okay, now we're going to duplicate this. So I'm going to move my cursor over the if statement here, right click and select duplicate. Remember, if you're on a Chromebook, you can go 2 fingers, a peace sign on the keypad, and that will be the same as right clicking as well. Okay, so we're just going to make some changes here. If player ID is equal to 2, we want our costume to be Luigi Idol. We want to change that X coordinate, so the Y is fine here, but the X has to become a minus 225. And the starting costume is going to be costume 5. So there's going to be, so Mario's going to have the first 4 costumes, an idol and 3 walking animations, and the next one over, number 5, is Luigi Idol. Okay, and let's duplicate that one more time for Wario. So he's going to be player number 3. His costume is going to be Wario Walk. His X location is going to be... Oh, I made an error there. So Wario's X location is minus 225. And Luigi's starting location is actually minus 195. There we go. Okay, so these guys should be placed properly now. And Wario's... So Wario Idol should be the costume here. And Wario's starting costume is number 9. Okay, let's just run that here, and you'll see that all 3 of our characters are all lined up at the beginning of the screen. And yeah, they should all be wearing the, they should all have the proper ID number now, and they're ready to go on the screen. Okay, so now that our player 1 pieces are set up on the game board, we can go ahead and roll the dice. So I'm going to move momentarily back to the board spaces, the playing board here, and right down at the spot where we create clones here. Once we're done creating clones, I'm going to want to engage a little broadcast here that's going to roll the virtual dice. So I'm going to broadcast a message here called player 1's turn, and that's going to get the ball rolling for that first turn of the game. All right, so we're going to go from here over to back to our player 1 sprite again. And we're going to receive that message when I receive player 1's turn. So in here, we're going to want to initialize a couple of variables again. I've got 4 of them here. First of all, we're going to set a variable called turn. And that's just keeping track of whose turn it is, player 1's or player 2's turn. Right now, it's neither player's turn, so we're just going to set that to 3 so it doesn't accidentally activate until we're ready to start moving player 1. We've got that other variable called have I moved here, that every time we start the turn, we're going to set that to 0. And that's a local variable, remember, so it's going to be that particular clone. It's going to know that it hasn't moved yet in that particular turn, but that's going to apply to every single clone because they're all going to receive this message. And then we've got these 2 variables, set die roll 1 and set die roll 2, that we're setting to 0 right now, and those are going to be the actual dice. That variable is going to hold the actual roll of the dice for our 2 dice, and we're going to randomize those later on in the dice. All right, so the next thing we want to have happen, we don't want it to happen for every single sprite. We want this just to happen once. Now this is a problem when we're receiving messages, because anything that you're doing in here is going to be done by every single one of the clones. So if you want something only done once, you need to order the main sprite to do it and not have the other sprites do it. And the way we do that is using that ID number that we set up. So I've got an if statement here that says if player number equals 4, which means the only character with player ID 4 is going to be the Mario, the original Mario sprite. So if I'm the original Mario sprite, then I'm going to execute this command, and I'm only going to do it once. And that message we're going to broadcast is a roll dice message. And that's going to send a message over to our actual dice sprite and get that generating some random numbers for us. So let's jump over to the dice sprite and do that next step. Okay, so I'm inside that dice sprite now. We'll look inside the contents of that. We just want to initialize a couple of things. First, the dice graphic's a bit too big, so we're going to set the size to 30%, and the main graphic is going to hide. We're going to have the clones be visible in a second. So back in player 1, we just broadcast this roll dice and wait. And now the script is waiting here for the die roll to be processed before it continues and moves on. And we'll add a bit more code in a few minutes. But right now, inside the dice here, we want to process this dice roll now. So we've got a variable here, a local variable under when I receive roll dice that's a die number. That's the ID number for the dice. So there's going to be a dice 1 and dice 2 because we're rolling 2 dice here. We're going to initialize that variable at 0 and just run it around a loop twice. So we're going to change the die number by 1. So that'll stamp a number 1 on the first dice and a number 2 on the second one, basically. There we go. Once we get out of here, we're going to do a wait. Again, we don't want to go back to player 1 when this receive stack of code is done. It's going to jump back to player 1 and let it go. So we're going to basically freeze this code in place here until the die roll is finished happening. We're going to grab a wait until block, which you can find at the control blocks, and that basically just freezes the code or this stack of code until a condition is true. We're actually checking for 2 things here, so it's a bit of a complicated construction. We want to know that die roll 1 and die roll 2 are both not equal to 0. So the way we do that is we say die roll 1 is equal to 0 and die roll 2 is equal to 0, not. And we plunk that in the wait until. Now this code is going to freeze and not go back to player 1 until both these die roll variables are back to 0 again. And that means that the dice have successfully rolled, basically. So it's waiting here for you to roll the dice. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the when I started the clone block. So we created the clone. Now the clone needs to know what it's going to do. First we're going to show the clone. So let's go to our looks commands and grab a show. And now we want to position the 2 dice properly. So again, we need to check and see which dice I am. We'll grab an if-else statement there, and I need an equal sign as well. And so I'm going to say if our die number is equal to 1. So I'm going to grab the little bubble that says die number is equal to 1. So if it's the first dice, then we're going to set the dice position as follows. We're going to go to XY, and the X is going to be 78, and the Y is going to be 136. All right, so the else means that we're not die number 1. It means we're going to be die number 2, and that's going to go into a different spot. So that position is going to be a little bit off to the side. So the Y position is the same, but the X is going to be 128. There we go, and that's going to position those dice nicely at the top of the screen. Let's just click the green flag here, and you can see our 2 dice are settled at the top of the screen here in their starting position. All right, so we're going to want to return to the dice and actually complete the animation for the dice rolling and then selective value. But first I want to go back and do a little bit more housekeeping here. So after this dice roll happens and these values change, this wait condition is going to be met here, and it's going to jump back to the player 1 sprite where you remember we were doing a broadcast and wait. So still inside this if statement here, right down below here, I just want to set a couple of things up that are going to be important in a second here. So we're going to set two variables here. The first one is called active die, and that is a global variable. We're going to set it to 1, and that's basically saying which of the two dice are we looking at right now. What is the one that's actually going to count towards our movement? Because we've rolled 2 dice, and we're going to be able to swap them. So we're going to be able to move, let's say I roll a 2 and a 4. We can choose to move 2, which is the first dice, or we can hit the space key and jump to the second dice and move 4 instead of 2 if we want to. So we're going to set active die to 1, which means we're looking at the first dice roll right now when it comes time for us to move. Okay, so in addition to this active die, we're also setting one more variable here, and that variable is called turn. Turn just tells us that it's player 1's option to move right now, that it's player 1's turn right now. So for the duration of this turn is going to be set to 1 until player 1 has finished moving, and then that'll flip over to 2 a little bit later. Okay, inside here, we also need to be checking for the one rare event, which is if we roll doubles. Things are going to proceed a little differently from here if we roll doubles, because there's a rule in our game that says that if you do roll doubles, all 3 of your characters have to move forward the equivalent of whatever we rolled our dice that turn. So we're going to have an if statement in here that's basically going to say if our die roll on dice 1 and die 2 are the same, that means we've got doubles, and we'll broadcast doubles. Okay, so we're back inside the dice sprite now, and now we're ready to process this dice roll. So the way the dice rolling in this game is going to work is we're going to be able to hold down the space key, and while we're holding down the space key, we're kind of rolling the dice around in our hand, and then when we let go of the space key, we're going to actually throw the dice. So we're going to kind of simulate that action of being able to roll the dice in your hands. So we need a couple of actions for that to happen. We're going to start with a wait until key space pressed, and that's going to start this animation where the dice sound is working. And then we're going to broadcast a message that is called dice roll, not to be confused with roll dice. So this is just going to get a few of the things in motion while the dice is being rolled. So we're going to broadcast that message, and it's going to be received down a little further here inside our dice sprite. When I receive dice roll, the first thing we're going to do is we don't want this happening twice. So again, we're going to do a check and see whether our die number is 1, and that's simply just making sure that this script only runs the once. It's only going to run for the first dice, and it won't run for the second one. Inside there, we're going to run a repeat until rolling dice equals 0. So basically, we're going to keep rolling that dice until we let go of that space key, and then so we're going to repeat this sound effect that we're going to put in here. Let's go ahead and put that sound effect in right now. Play sound dice idle. I've got a little sound effect here that's very Nintendo-esque that kind of simulates the sound of electronic dice rolling. Let's play that in there. So this loop is going to keep playing that dice sound until we let go of the keyboard key. Okay, so that dice roll sound effect is running now inside its own loop. We wanted this in its own little section here because we've got 2 things happening simultaneously, and we don't want them messing this up. Messing each other up. So while this sound effect is repeatedly playing, we're also going to be changing the animation for the dice around to simulate that rolling effect. So right here, right after I broadcast dice roll, there's no wait here, so it's just going to jump right to the next little bit of code here, and in there is we're going to change the animation around. First, though, we do have to set a variable. So we're going to set that variable rolling dice. We're going to set it to 1. You'll remember that this sound effect is just going to keep playing until rolling dice is equal to 0. So now it's been changed to 1. That will keep this loop playing indefinitely. And so this is how we're going to control that other loop that's running down below here. All right, so we've set our rolling dice to 1. Now we're going to start repeating a costume change. So we're repeating until we're no longer pressing the space key. So not key space pressed. And what's going to happen in there is we're going to switch our costume to one of these 6 animated dice costumes. And so we're just going to repeatedly keep swapping back and forth between these 6, kind of simulating the idea of rolling the dice. As soon as we let go, though, this loop's going to stop. And then we can set that rolling dice variable back to 0, which will stop the sound effect. So let's go set variable. And we're going to set dice rolling dice back to 0 again. That will stop the sound effect. It'll stop this loop, but the sound effect might still keep going because it's doing an until done here. So how do we make sure the sound effect gets actually cut off here? We could theoretically do a stop all sounds, which is available in our stop menu, and that will definitely shut down this sound, but it will shut down the background music as well and any other sounds that are playing at this moment. So we don't want to do that. So how do we stop this sound effect playing right now without stopping the other sounds? Well, we can set the volume to 0. This is a little bit of a hack here. So you might be aware that volume settings always affect that sprite's volume, but none of the other sprites. So we just want that dice roll sound to be muted right now. So we'll set the volume to 0. And that will shut off that sound immediately, regardless of where we are inside this dice idle sound effect. Okay, good. So we've shut off that sound. We should be able to test this out now. So let's give it a try. I'm just going to hide that variable, which we don't need to see anymore. And let's click the green flag. So you can see our dice have appeared at the top of the screen here. So we're going to hit the space key. And you can see that sound effect is playing now. And then when I let go, the sound effect stops. And we stop on a number there. Perfect. So our dice have finished rolling here. And what we're going to do next is run a little animation that takes the finished dice roll and brings them down to the bottom of the screen. We've got a little variable display here that I've hidden for now, but let me call it up here. There's 2 variables here called die roll 1 and die roll 2. So these are the actual results of the dice roll. Right now they say 0, but what we're going to do is have these dice fly into these spots and transfer the number that they've rolled down into here. It's quite a cool effect once we get it going, and you'll see it in just a second here. So the actual number that comes up on this dice animation doesn't really relate to the number that we've rolled. We did pick a number from 1 to 6 here, and we're going to translate that into a real number inside the game that we're going to put into these variable slots in a second here. But the actual graphic doesn't actually line up. So, for example, in this case, we've landed on a dice roll of 6, and there's not really a 6 on the screen here. But it doesn't matter because this is actually gonna start moving almost immediately after we let go of that space key. So you're never going to be able to see what this looks like. What's going to happen is this dice is going to turn into a number, to an actual digit number. And you can see here under the costumes that we have, in addition to the 6 dice costumes, we have 6 costumes here with actual die roll numbers here. So our number is going to turn into that immediately before we can even see that the dice hasn't properly rolled here, and then that number is going to fly down to the bottom of the screen here. So let's get started on the coding for that. The first thing we're going to want to do is we've cut off our sound here, but we actually do want another sound effect playing. And to circumvent that problem, we're going to make a new sound play in a different sprite. And that way we can get around the fact that our volume has been set to 0 and avoid any additional problems. So it's a bit of a hack again. But what we're going to do is broadcast a message here. And the new message that we're going to send out is called dice result. So we're going to broadcast dice result. That's going to be received in only one place. Over here in this sprite called player display, this is where we're going to use, where we're going to say player 1 or player 2's turn right now. So this doesn't directly relate to what player 1 or player 2 are doing, but in this spot here, just because the volume's at 100% here, we're going to go when I receive dice result, play sound. And the sound is called Dice Roll Super Mario Party sound effects. So it's basically a sound that happens in Mario games when you finish rolling, and it sounds like this. There we go. So David, who put this project together with me, did a very careful look at the timing of these different parts of the sound. It's really the sound effect is in two different chunks here. The first part, the pop sound, and then the ding sound at the end, right? And he measured out how long both these two clips would take to run. And so the next part of the code, we're going to go back to the dice again. And in there, we're going to take advantage of this timing to make the dice move during the first part of the sound and then land here just as the second part goes. So it'll make more sense as we're moving into it. So the first thing we want to do is switch our costume here. We want to switch from a dice costume to one of these costumes. And the way that we're going to do it is, so if we land on dice 3, which doesn't really look like a 3 here, we're going to want to transfer that to make it an actual 3 on the keyboard. So because of the way this is set up, we just have to add 6 to our existing dice roll. There's 6 of these graphics and 6 of these. So if I add 6 to costume 3, we end up at costume 9, which will give us a 3 again, right? So we just need to switch our costume here. Let's go to our looks command. We'll go switch costume to, and we're going to take our existing costume number and we're going to add 6 to it. So we'll add a +6 into here. And on the left side of that, we're going to grab our costume number, which we can get at the bottom of our looks menu here. Okay, so switch costume to costume number +6. And that will instantly turn. So I'll show you that again. So we've got, let's say our costume's at 2 here for this first dice. And when I click on this, you can see that the graphic turns to a 2. It won't do in this clone, though. I would have to actually show the dice here. So let me just show a dice. There's my dice that says 2. And when I add 6 to it, it converts the number to 2. So that's working nicely. Let's hide that original dice. We don't need that. Okay, so we've got our dice turned into a digit here, both of them. And since this was a clone, it's happening to both clones here, since this is all happening to when we start as a clone. Now we need the 2 dice to behave differently. We need this one to fly down to this spot on the screen and this one to fly down to this spot on the screen. We're going to accomplish that using an if-else statement. So we're going to say if die equals 1, we're going to send it to one location, and the else will be die 2, which will send to a different location. So first we want to wait for that sound effect to finish. So we're going to wait exactly 0.93 seconds. Thank you, David, for being so accurate. And then when that first sound effect is going, then the ding is going to play for 0.3 seconds. And while that ding is playing, we're going to glide to this location, an X of -119 and a Y of -170. And that will take us down to that first bubble. For the second bubble, we're just going to duplicate this, and all we have to change is the X coordinate here. The Y coordinate stays the same, so we're just going to go -2 for this second dice roll, and that will land us on top of this spot here. Okay, let's test that out. It's not 100% ready because we haven't changed these numbers over yet, but let me just show you what that looks like. Let me hide the original dice graphic for starters. Okay, so let's click the green flag, hold down our dice, and you'll see when we stop, it turns into a digit, and then flies down perfectly aligned with the sound effects. Nice work, David. Let me show you that one more time. Listen to the sound effects and see how nicely synchronized they are here. Ready to let go now. Beautiful. Nice example of how careful attention to timing. If you get your sound effects and your graphics working in harmony, it looks professional. It's beautiful. I love it. Okay. So we're not quite done here, as I said, because we still have to change that die roll number to an actual digit down below in the variable here. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to grab a set variable. We're going to set die roll 1 here under the first part of the if statement, of the if-else statement. And we're going to put a subtraction marker in there, and we're going to say -6. So on the left side here, we want the costu number. Let's go to our looks commands here, grab costu number. So we're going to set our first die roll to costu number -6. And then we're going to delete this clone, which is just going to get rid of that fake dice from the bottom of the screen, and we'll be set up and ready to go for the next round. So I'm going to take those 2 blocks, or the bottom 2 sections of this code here, and I'm going to duplicate it and put it underneath the else statement. And so now I'll change the set die roll 1 to die roll 2, and this will still be costu number -6. And delete this clone is still good. So that should all be good. And now if everything worked properly, our dice should be rolling properly and landing in this spot and changing those numbers. Let's give her a try. Ready? Beautiful! And those numbers look like they just jumped right into that little variable slot there. Beautiful. Let's look at it one more time. 1, 3. Love it. Okay. So that is it for the dice rolling now. In our next session, we're going to start moving player 1 around the board and on the basis of what this dice roll was. So we'll get to that in our next lesson. Thanks for joining me.